In an equally shocking and, I guess, unshocking case that was surfaced and now an arrest that has been made, Jeffrey Sandusky, son of Jerry Sandusky, known now infamously for and serving a 45-year sentence for child molestation charges, over 20 kids molested and raped during his time at Penn State University and through his foundation. His son Jeffrey Sandusky was arrested on similar charges, not as drastic, but still. We'll get into the quotes and context and some elements that all arose yesterday that go back to March of 2016. So, according to the criminal docket filed by Rockview, Pennsylvania police, Sandusky is facing a total of 14 charges, including criminal solicitation of statutory sexual assault, criminal solicitation of involuntary deviant sexual intercourse from a person less than 16 years old, and 2 counts of criminal solicitation of child pornography. The list of charges was also picked up by the likes of Deadspin, TMZ, and you can see for the most part contact with minor and sexual abuse, criminal solicitation, as I mentioned, corruption of minors. So he's currently arrested in Center County Prison, which is in Pennsylvania. A bail is set for $200,000. We are sure this will face way more investigation in terms of what happened. Francis, for a little bit more context for you in terms of where this is coming from and what he really did in specific, we have the Center Daily Times quote into how this kind of this rabbit hole started to dive down into. So Sandusky's text request to the minor was eradicated in the complaint. However, he said that, quote, "it's not weird because he studied medicine." He then allegedly advised the minor not to show the text to anyone. Jeffrey Sandusky allegedly asked the minor to erase all the text the next morning. Police said that none of it gets mentioned to or seen by anyone. He then told her that he and the minor need to talk to get things straightened out. So he's trying to cover up what had happened. The parents found this out, and they reported it to police. So I got to go back to Jerry Sandusky at some point in this clip to give even more context to just how demonic his acts were at Penn State. But Francis, is always curious your thoughts and if this is surprising.
So this case didn't stand out to me as something that I remember. I looked into it and then it started to ring a few bells, but I mean, the overwhelming case is something that reminds me a lot of back in the United Kingdom and in the world football as a whole, with coaches using their position of power to molest kids, sickeningly. So when I looked into this story with Jerry Sandusky, his other adopted son, Matthew Sandusky, had came out recently. Deadspin was reporting that he said that Jerry Sandusky molested him as a kid. So although it's not pointing fingers towards Jerry Sandusky molesting this Jerry, the young Jerry Sandusky that's in this example now, you got to realize that it is all a domino effect from how horrific...
From when he was younger.
From how horrific of a father he had, a man that was so sickening, that carried out these atrocious acts, and we can be led to kind of make that accurate assumption that it did trickle back. It did trickle back and eventually affected those kids at home. They obviously grew up now understanding that this is what their father had done. This is what their father stood by, and he reflected those morals on the kids as well. So Matthew Sandusky has came out and bravely spoke of what happened to him and said that this is something that happened at home. And this man, this other sick individual, he has just looked to emulate what his father had done. Almost just mirror the way he was taught when he was younger, what he thought was something that was probably normal. He maybe grew up thinking that this is something that happens, that his mind had tried to contemplate the horror he was facing. And I'm not making excuses for him. This is the difference in this situation, is you have to be really careful and really try to understand how these things happen, because far too often I think in society we shun the acts as just simply sickening, which they are. But in order to resolve something and try to figure out, there's numerous people throughout the world that are probably going through the exact same thing at the moment. And you want to try and find some sort of consensus to have a discussion as to how can we prevent this from happening. Because when someone like this, the father, is a sexual predator, then it's going to find its way back down to the kids that are involved. And you got to try and do what you can to prevent it from affecting more kids and from it carrying through generations.
But yeah, whether they're being the victim or victimizing somebody else, this is the environment's dictating
Yes.
what. And again, could get stripped out of context. But in Jeffrey Sandusky's case, I'm sure that he thinks this is relatively normal, or at least because he grew up with this,
Yeah.
it wasn't something that he found abnormal.
Yeah.
Right? He thought this is something. Now, in Jeffrey Sandusky's case, the girl that this started to lead to the investigation and the arrest being made was just under 16 years old, about 15 and a half years old. Jerry Sandusky's story, which I can't believe still has now gotten, we bring it up because we're talking about Jeffrey Sandusky getting arrested, but we're talking about one of the most sickening, there's no ranking for this, it's probably the most deplorable thing I've seen in college sports. Because when you look back on the 2002, right, that's when this, for all we know, that's when it started. What Jerry Sandusky did was he had a foundation, right, where he would help out underprivileged kids, most of which who lost their fathers at a young age, right? Either they left the family, or they were, unfortunately, whether it be they died somehow, one way or another, there was no father present. So he would promise them, gifts. He'd bring them to Penn State football games. He'd bring them to buy them certain things, whether it be video games or that, and establish the trust. Then, in again, 2002, assistant coach, I know his last name is McQuarrie, walks in on Jerry Sandusky anally raping a 10-year-old boy. And he tells that to Joe Paterno. And Joe Paterno says, I'll take care of it from here. And then Joe Paterno doesn't do damn thing. So while a lot of people like this whole idea of how could you strip away Joe Pa's legacy, Joe Pa doesn't deserve a legacy. He is as demonic as an individual as Jerry Sandusky for letting so many, the number over 1 is disgusting to anybody, right? But the X amount of people who were raped, 10 years old, 12 years old, 8-year-olds, and taking advantage of that. So this was something that Jeffrey Sandusky grew up with, Matthew Sandusky grew up with. To them, it was just around them. And that is not an excuse, as you're pointing out. It doesn't make it okay, but it does lead you to an understanding of why do these things happen? Well, look at the environment they're coming from.
Yeah, when that apple doesn't fall far from the tree, especially when what I'm led to assume is there wasn't enough focus on these kids to try and help contemplate what had happened to them, what was happening around them, and try to get them out of that environment and into a more stable environment. And what you mentioned there, I mean, I just watched Spotlight again this weekend, and it's a very similar situation.
Yes.
Now, as we know, if you haven't seen the movie, in Boston and priests all over the world utilizing their position of authority, targeting kids, not all examples, but most examples, kids that have lost their fathers, that are looking for any sort of fatherly figure to help show them guidance. And they often see it, when it comes to the religious aspect, it's almost like a connection with God. Like, you've got to show some sort of respect. But I see a lot of similarities with that in coaching. I've made this point before. When I was younger and my coach showed me a little bit more attention in the footballing aspect, I thought I was the bee's knees. I thought I was the best. I was like, this is unbelievable. I'm getting attention from the coach out of all these kids. I'm doing things right. And it really breaks my heart to think that there is such sickening individuals out there that use that as a weapon to attract vulnerable kids and make them do whatever they want. So there's such a position of authority when it comes to whether it's a coach or a teacher, or as you in the religious aspect, a priest. And it really is one of the most disgusting things that I think you can ever report on in life, when you see someone use that position just to manipulate young minds, because that's where we put a lot. Like, it takes, I'm a strong advocate for it takes a community to raise a family. And I think that you've got I put so much emphasis on how important in today's day and age teachers are and coaches are and all these inspirational people that take up these jobs because they want to help and they want to do these things to help grow the future generation to be caring and ambitious. And it just, you get horrible people that find their way into this. And the only thing you can try and do is try to stamp it out, report any sort of suspicion that you see, and don't try to bury it like Jason mentioned in that example. And just pay attention, especially those around it, and try and pay attention to make sure this thing doesn't happen. And this is a clear example of something that I don't think enough attention was shown to it was maybe shown towards Jerry Sandusky, but it wasn't shown towards the kids that are affected with this, and it's now resulted in another horrible example.
And that's because, unfortunately, the kids aren't the story.
Yeah.
Sandusky was the story. Joe Paterno's legacy at Penn State was the story.
I'm not wanting media to go around it. I'm talking about, like, maybe a community care or
right.
some sort. I'm not giving to. These kids shouldn't be dragged into the story. It's the worst thing that could happen. They should be kept separate from the story. It should be an emphasis as maybe those that are involved in trying to help families that have not just fallen victim to this, because they're of course the first priority. You got to help that family rebuild. Their lives have simply been destroyed because of a sickening act, but also there's other lives that are being destroyed also at the same time that you need to try and focus some attention to try and help as a preventative measure so that this thing doesn't happen again. Because what I don't know the enough facts in it, but from what it says to me here is that this individual was in amongst this toxic environment and thought that was the way to be, thought that was the way things went. Now his adopted brother, Matthew, he obviously saw things a little differently, and maybe there could have been some sort of preventative measures put in there to try and prevent Jeffrey Sandusky from going forward and doing this, but it's really horrible. I just hate when you look back at things that could have possibly been prevented, you know?
Of course, man. I mean, it's sickening, and it's not surprising in terms of Jeffrey Sandusky's arrest. That's what he grew up with.
Yeah.
That's not justification for it, by the way. So he'll probably and most likely end up in jail with his father.
Deservedly.
And deservingly end up in jail with his father. Make sure to hash it out in the comments section below. God knows what that's going to look like. Like, favorite, subscribe to the channel for more news, sports updates, all that good stuff. We'll see you next time.